One thing that I've not quite solved with this swap is the 4-wheel drive actuation. So normally it's this lever, comes in and out. That's what is physically inside the transfer case, engaging the center diff lock. Now, normally this has a large vacuum diaphragm that occupies the space that this intake manifold is now taking. So my solution currently is this guy. This is a General Motors some truck transfer case actuator, and it fits fairly compact, and will have the correct amount of travel that we need for that. So I'm designing the bracket for this now, and where I've kind of come from is I got the stock bracket for the vacuum diaphragm. I've chopped it all up to remove the diaphragm, obviously, and we're just gonna mount it about there. That'll put us in the correct position roughly, and I could just drill a hole to allow the actuator to slide through. Where I'm not sure about is, so this doesn't have threads on it. There's a spring in here, and basically in the stock application this just pushes on whatever it's actuating. So I have a couple options. Primarily what I'm even thinking about is adding a spring right here. There's a kind of a recess which will default this to push out, and then the transfer case actuation motor can push it in. I don't love that idea because then I'm having springs fighting springs and hoping that the transfer case is in the right position. I may also riv nut potentially some threads right here. This plastic piece comes out. Wouldn't be impossible to add threads. So I'll get the stock bracket bolted up. These appear to be they're M10 bolts. Or are they 3 bolts? Well, there's threads. They're M10s. Yeah, well, you know, that is an M10. That's kind of surprising. That's way overkill. That's okay. Alright, so I just drilled a hole in that bracket. Let's see if you can see it a little better. Yeah, just right there. So it's pretty much dead in line with the transfer case thing, whatever. You can probably tell by the light, which is a decent way to check alignment. Now, that hole's just big enough for this to slide through. So this currently is in its fully extended state. So normally this would sit back here, but it's fully extended. So let's make sure the transfer case is in the locked position, which it is. Then this slide in here, just like that. And let's check. Now you guys obviously can't feel and definitely can't see right now, but it's basically touching. It's just a tiny bit off, which is actually perfect. Exactly what I want. So now let's do the opposite. Let's fully retract this thing and then unlock the transfer case and see what happens. Let's first unlock, just like that. Then I'll deactivate this thing and we'll check. All right, now let's put that in again. Good news, that bottoms out again, and almost the exact same amount of clearance, which is actually freaking awesome. So what this means is that I just need to add a way to connect these. Let's pull this out. This is transfer case actuator from GM. It just needs power and ground in a couple places to move this thing, and it normally screws into the diff right here, and I couldn't quite identify those threads, so I actually 3D printed a nut because each nut was like $15. I didn't want to order like 4 different nuts to test fit them. Now that I know this thread is correct, I can order that in steel and weld it to that bracket, and then I will pretty much be done with this thing. Then at that point I need to figure out a way to attach like a thread or something onto this end, which will clamp onto that shaft. So now I have that tacked up. I ended up using 2 nuts to space the actuator out a little bit farther from the box. It's a little tight, but I can get it in and out. So that should be great. It might be a little hard to mount the actual actuator itself onto the arm on the back there, so I need to think about that. Alright, well, let's see what we got here. Alright, so I finished welding up the bracket here, and I put a little angle aluminum piece as well as a shaft clamp. And that is actually everything needed for it to function. If I can get light on this location. So, now we have electric 4-wheel drive. Now it's 4, open, lock, open. So that was actually everything we need. I'll pull this bracket out and show you exactly what I did since the lighting is terrible. Alright, so it's the next day, it's light outside, so I can at least show you what the hell I'm talking about. So this was the bracket I ended up making. This was the factory vacuum actuator bracket. I just drilled the spot welds out, cut the vacuum actuator off, welded 3 nuts on. This ended up being necessary just to get the spacing right. And I made this quick little bracket out of angled aluminum. Right here, this was the GM actuator. I epoxied a riv nut in place. Now I epoxied it in place because due to the thickness of the plastic, you actually can't compress the riv nut the normal way. And since it's in plastic, it would just like shatter the plastic. So I epoxied that in place just to make that easier. It actually makes it easier for install as well, which I'll get to in a bit. But then this gets installed. Then this is just a like shaft collar. It's a 16 mil and the shaft is actually 14, but the double split ends up meaning that this distance is actually 14 mil. That's fine. I welded a bolt on there so that I could stick it in here and use 2 nuts to adjust the position. If I need to move it in or out, I can just turn those nuts a little. But last time I installed it, this was pretty bang on where it needed to be, so I'm just going to keep it there. Now, order of operations is a little difficult here. Doubly so because I have a camera in the way. But we need to make sure that this is in a location where it can come in and out. Make sure to turn the axles in such a way where they can allow that. Then we need to actually slide the shaft collar on. Now, let's see if I can do this with the camera. Alright, so I got those bolts threaded in. Now what we need to do is tighten them, but not completely. They do need to be slightly loose at this step. Oh, fuck. So basically what I did is I made them as tight as possible where I could still move this around some. Then the next step is to install that bracket. Alright, now that the bracket is installed, here's the fun part, is installing the actuator. I'm going to leave the electrical connection unplugged for now. So I ended up switching out to a stud here instead. Now here's the fun part, is lining everything up. Left this, remember we left this loose so that I could move it around a bit. Okay, yeah, now I have everything lined up, and I just need to put a nut on that stud. Okay, now I'm going to hook up the electrics and see how it does. So, at this point, it's extended, and I have to tighten this on the back. Now I gotta retract it. I think we're complete. It's fucking perfect. All right, first drive. We can do a couple laps around the neighborhood. First up. I can hear the tires chirping, so that's the welded diff doing its job, I guess. It's not great, is what it is. Let's see. Let's see if I can get in first. Might be third. That's still third. That may be second. Okay, so something up with my shifter for sure. Can't quite get into, that might be first. Nope, let's third again. That's second. Well, she fucking moves.